The Spinnaker delivers power, lots of power, and it's a challenge to handle. I'm Rob McLeod. You've just taken the first step in mastering that temperamental sail, and it's going to pay off in the race course and when downwind sailing. In this video, you're going to see how to hoist, set, and control the racing Spinnaker. You're also going to see a cruising Spinnaker, or Jenniker, in action. Your instructor is Tom Whidden. Tom was Dennis Connor's tactician when he won the America's Cup, and he's president of North Sails. And I can assure you that Tom knows everything there is to know about sailing Spinnakers. A world-class crew makes Spinnaker handling look easy. It's up with the big sail, down with the Genoa, all in seconds while rounding the mark. What makes a world-class racer? Well, it's a combination of knowledge, skill, good judgment, and teamwork. These qualities are learned with plenty of on-the-water practice and a good grounding in the basics of Spinnaker handling. And that's where our host, Tom Whidden, comes in. He's a winning America's Cup racer and president of North Sails. Tom is joined by Roger Renault on the helm, Eric Martinen on the foredeck, John Key as pitman, Rick Bod on the Spinnaker sheet, and Ross Morrissey trimming the afterguard.
Sailing downwind can provide some of the most exhilarating sailing, whether racing or cruising, because sailboats travel fastest when the wind is aft of the beam. A specially designed sail, like a Spinnaker, if you're a racer, or a Jenniker if you're a cruiser, can really make your boat move. These sails are huge. In fact, a Spinnaker can often be as big or bigger than the Maine and Genoa combined. Some sailors shy away from using the Spinnaker or Jenniker, thinking that they're difficult to manage. In this program, I hope to dispel that notion by teaching you some of the tricks of the trade and some of the things that I've learned over the years in international competition. I also hope to share with you some of the things that we've learned about designing, building, and testing these wonderful downwind sails. We're aboard Welsh Wizard, a CS-36 Merlin. We chose a boat this size so that we could fit the entire video crew aboard and still have enough space left over to perform the crew functions. But most things are similar for smaller boats, and I'll be sure to point out those things that are done differently. Rigging a Spinnaker needs some special gear. Let's start with the halyard, whose job is to hold up the sail. The sheave at the top of the mast is actually placed above the headstay itself, so that the Spinnaker can be flown at many different angles. Some boats have two sheaves at the top of the mast to facilitate the use of two halyards. The best obvious reason for having two halyards is if one breaks, you can still set a Spinnaker on the other one. Some larger and more sophisticated racing boats actually have a whole inventory of Spinnakers. And when you have more than one halyard, you can actually peel back and forth between the sails. The most important attribute a Spinnaker halyard needs is strength. It must have the ability to absorb shock, and it must be able to withstand loads from many directions. Some boats use wire halyards, and some boats use rope halyards. Wire stretches less, but chafes a little more at the top of the mast. Rope chafes less, but unfortunately stretches a little bit more. Many racing boats will choose wire just for the lower stretch, when many cruising boats will choose the rope for less chafe. On long downwind races, like a Mexican race, where we use wire halyards, we actually adjust the position of the halyard many times during the race to cut down on this excessive wear. And next is the Spinnaker pole. The Spinnaker pole projects the clew of the Spinnaker outboard. The most important attribute for a Spinnaker pole is that it can be stiff enough to withstand the compression the Spinnaker puts on it. The inboard end of the Spinnaker pole is attached to the mast in one of two ways, either on a sliding car with an uphaul and a downhaul to actually adjust its inboard position, or affixed to the mast permanently on a ring, and some boats have a series of rings. The other end of the Spinnaker pole has a jaw on it. It allows the Spinnaker sheet to pass through it and affix the clew of the spinnaker as closely to the pole end as is possible. You'll notice a line coming from the jaw all the way to the deck and then adjusted back in the cockpit. It's called the foreguy and keeps the pole from lifting on its own. The line counteracting the foreguy is called the topping lift, and that also is adjusted from back in the cockpit and allows the crew to place the spinnaker pole end at any height. The trip line, when pulled, opens the jaw on the outboard end of the pole. We can talk about its use later when we go through jibing. The shock cord on top of the pole goes up to the topping lift, and when the topping lift is not tight, it pulls the topping lift back to the mast. And that leads us to the after guy. The after guy is the line that keeps the spinnaker pole at right angles to the wind. The after guy has a dual purpose in life. On port jibe, it's the after guy, and on starboard jibe, it's the sheet. Just as we see on the other end of the foot of the spinnaker at the clew, the spinnaker sheet. But if we were to jibe and the pole was to be affixed to that sheet, that starboard line would then become the after guy. Let's look at that once again. Because the spinnaker is symmetrical, either side of the sail can be the leading edge, and that's the edge presented to the wind. Looking at the sail from a position on board while sailing on port jibe, the leading edge, called the luff, is held outboard by the spinnaker pole at the tack. The outboard edge of the pole is controlled by a line called the after guy. The trailing edge is called the leech, and the clew is controlled by the sheet. On starboard jibe, the other side of the sail becomes the leading edge, and the names of the parts of the sail change accordingly. The spinnaker pole should usually be 90 degrees to the wind. If the wind should shift, we can see that the wind can't flow on both sides of the sail, and it will collapse starting at the luff. To prevent a collapse, we can adjust the pole so that the leading edge of the sail is presented properly, with the pole 90 degrees to the apparent wind. With the pole in position, the leading edge of the sail points directly into the wind, allowing a smooth flow on both sides of the sail, creating an airfoil. You can make a wind direction pointer by taping a piece of yarn to the pole. You'll then be able to see the wind's apparent direction, and trimming the after guy becomes a cinch. A primary consideration for the after guy is minimal stretch. Many of the sophisticated racing boats have tried very low stretch materials like Kevlar, Allied Spectra, and wire. One disadvantage with wire is it's a little harder for the crew to handle, particularly back at the winch. The after guy then leads from the center block at the maximum beam of the boat straight back to the winch that Ross is controlling. On many boats that I sail on, people think that it's right to cleat off the after guy and then play the sheet. I think this is a big mistake. We learned earlier that the after guy controls the pole and that the pole should be approximately 90 degrees to the wind at all times. We all know that the wind shifts, and we don't know very many helmsmen that steer perfectly straight downwind. So it's so critical to move that pole forward and aft depending on where the apparent wind is coming from at any time. The other adjustment, of course, that we'll talk about later again is up and down, and that needs to be done as well. At the other end of the spinnaker is the spinnaker sheet. In general, particularly for reaching, the spinnaker sheet leads to the very aft portion of the boat. This will prevent the leech from getting too tight and overpowering. When the wind moves aft, say after the beam or on a run, you can actually move the sheet lead forward on the rail to facilitate a tighter or more powered up shape. The spinnaker sheet itself should be double the length of the boat. This allows the clew to go all the way forward to the headstay and the tail to go all the way forward to the forward triangle to allow the sheet trimmer to see all of the spinnaker. One good way to trim the spinnaker is to lead the spinnaker sheet from the leeward side of the boat up to a winch on the windward side. This enables all the weight on the weather side of the boat, as well as the sheet trimmer himself, to see the entire luff of the spinnaker. Trimming the spinnaker is an art. The main idea is to keep the sail full and on edge. In other words, ease the sheet as far as it can go without collapsing the sail. The best indicator for watching optimum trim is the leading edge of the sail, the spinnaker's luff. The sheet should be let off just a little, keeping an eye on the luff. Let it out till you can just see it curl, and then trim it back until the curl disappears. The after guy is also adjusted constantly to keep the pole 90 degrees to the apparent wind. When the pole is in the right spot, the spinnaker's luff will curl evenly all the way from the head down to the tack. Remember to keep the boat on its lines by moving crew weight forward in light air and aft as the breeze comes up. This will allow the boat to surf more easily in fresher breeze. In lighter winds, you may want to make the sail fuller by under-squaring or moving the pole forward, which will make the angle between the pole and the wind more than 90 degrees. In heavier air, you'll want to flatten the foot of the sail by over-squaring or pulling the pole back, which will make the angle of the pole to the wind less than 90 degrees. The sheet and the after guy control the position of the sail relative to the wind. As the direction of the wind changes, the sail is moved to accommodate the change. Another important adjustment is the height of the pole, which controls the sail's shape. We'll go back to the loft, where I'll show you how it works on a model sailboat. We program in the measurements, the J, the length of the fore triangle, the I, the height of the mast above the deck, for this model. The computer then calculates all the dimensions necessary to come up with our fastest shape. It even cuts the panels. So this sail is an exact replica of what we would make for the full-size boat. Let me see if I can conjure up some wind. This is a trick that I use very often during racing. When running before the wind, a spinnaker needs to be powerful and full. The pole should always be at right angles to the apparent wind, and the clew height should be approximately the same. The pole height has a dramatic effect on the overall setup of the spinnaker. When you raise the pole, the leeches, particularly in the top of the sail, get quite straight and open, and raising the pole too high actually allows them to spill air. Lowering the spinnaker pole has the opposite effect. It actually increases the curvature of the spinnaker by tightening the leeches. The disadvantage is that it loses projected area, but at the same time it gains stability. Usually, somewhere in between the two extremes is a perfect setup for maximum projected area and maximum stability. Now let's look at the spinnaker on a reach. We'll turn the model around so you can see the greatest amount of the spinnaker. We'll shift the wind, one of my patented wind shifts. And from an angle below the sail, you can see that the spinnaker flies quite differently on a reach, acting more like a Genoa. And like a Genoa, you adjust the shape of the spinnaker to fit the wind conditions. In light air, you want a full shape to generate plenty of lift. In heavy air, you want to reduce projected area and stabilize the sail. By the way, a sail shape is described by its depth and draft position. Depth refers to the fullness of the sail. The deepest part of the sail is divided by its chord length, and that's the distance between the leeches, which gives us a number expressed as a percentage. On a run, a spinnaker's depth could be 50%, but on a reach it might be 23%. Draft position tells us where along the sail the maximum depth occurs. Is the maximum fullness near the front of the sail, or is it near the back end? Draft position is a measurement of the distance from the leading edge of the sail to the location where maximum depth occurs divided by the chord length. Draft position is moved to the forward part of the sail in light air to create a full shape, increasing lift. In heavier air, due to stretch created by loading, the draft position tends to move back. Draft position on a reach in a spinnaker is controlled by the relative height of the clews. The old maxim, make the clews even, isn't so important anymore. On a reach, judicious clue juggling, as seen here from the bow, affects the draft position. Looking from the stern, we can see that lowering the tack moves the draft forward, and that depowers the sail. And raising the tack up moves the draft aft, making the sail more powerful. An all-purpose spinnaker should be flown on a reach with the clews even, or the tack slightly lower than the clew, putting the draft at 40 to 50% of the way aft. There are only 4 important things sailors can do to affect spinnaker shape. 1. Raise and lower the pole to change the spinnaker's depth, particularly at the top of the sail. 2. And by the same token, raise and lower the pole to change where the depth or draft falls. 3. Trim the pole back and forth to change the spinnaker's angle to the wind. And 4. Change the sheet lead to control the power of the sail as well as the spinnaker's depth at the bottom. Let's consider overall depth. The rule of thumb is the closer the leeches are to each other, the deeper the sail. When you lower the outboard end of the pole, the 2 leeches get tighter, moving them closer, and the sail becomes deeper. This, by the way, is contrary to popular wisdom. On the other hand, raise the pole, and the leeches get looser. They move further apart, and the sail gets flatter. This can be distilled to these 2 simple rules. 1. Pole up, leeches get looser, sail gets flatter. 2. Pole down, leeches get tighter, sail gets fuller. Launching the spinnaker takes some practice. Each step has to be carefully done, and timing is everything. Practice in light air, just like we have today. On a boat this size, a crew of 5 or 6 makes it possible to get each step done in time. It could be done with fewer people, but it would be more difficult. On a smaller boat, however, such as an Etchells 22, a crew of 3 can manage just fine. One of the keys to a successful spinnaker set is to make sure that all the crew communicates together. It is truly a team effort. To make it easier and to see how it's done, we'll launch the spinnaker without the Genoa. Eric, you're on the foredeck. Here's the spinnaker. Crew organization is critical to successful spinnaker handling. Write out all the steps, assign tasks, and ensure everyone knows his or her job. And this is especially important for the bowman. The first step is to set up the pole. The inboard end is attached to the mast and set at the right height. The downhaul, which prevents the outboard end of the pole from rising, is snapped into place. And the topping lift, which holds up the pole, is set up. Next comes the sail. The spinnaker is packed, and the lines are usually set before the race begins, preferably before the boat leaves the dock. That way, the bowman can hook up the sail quickly and not worry about tangling the lines as the boat approaches the mark. Here, Eric attaches the spinnaker halyard to the head of the sail, the after guy to the tack, and the sheet to the clew. In a race, every second counts, so it helps to have all the pieces clearly marked to prevent any mistakes or delays. Next, Eric puts the after guy through the jaw of the spinnaker pole. If the line is fed through in the wrong direction, it will be difficult to release when jibing.
Okay, raise the pole.
Take a moment to check it. The topping lift is raised to hold up the pole. Once the pole is set, the sheet and guy trimmers take up the slack on the corners of the sail, while Eric pulls up the head of the sail with the spinnaker halyard. The sheet trimmer must take care that he's not too quick or the sail may fill too soon. This can put a twist in the head, resulting in an hourglass, which usually means you have to douse the sail and start again. That was a great set, guys. The sail went up perfectly, and the sail's flying well also. Now, if we were racing, we'd have a head sail that we would have to deal with too. Let's look at the launch once again with a head sail up. Now, of course, we have to be more careful with the hookup and to make sure that it goes up outside the Genoa with no wraps. The object is to launch the spinnaker as soon as you round the windward mark, so get it ready while still on the upwind leg. The spinnaker is launched on the leeward side of the boat. The helmsman should plan his downwind course early and tell the bowman on which side he plans to launch the spinnaker. If the boat's Genoa is large, it's a good idea to set up the spinnaker when the Genoa is on the opposite side to the planned spinnaker launch. This takes a little forethought on the part of the skipper while tacking upwind. Our spinnaker lines were laid out in advance for a launch from port, so Eric has to go fishing to get them around to the starboard side. The halyard is outside the jib, and all the lines are outside the lifelines. Eric once again attaches the after guy to the tack, and the sheet to the clew, and the halyard to the sail's head. As soon as the chute's ready, the bowman tells the skipper and then goes to the mast ready to hoist the sail. The boat prepares to tack onto the final course towards the mark. Ready about. Tacking. And now the pole can be set up. The after guy is attached. As well as the downhaul. And now the pole goes up. Notice how far the spinnaker pole extends beyond the forestay. The extra length makes jibing a little tricky, but allows the sail to capture the wind. Halyard up. Make sure the sail is up and the pole pulled back before filling the chute. And get that Genoa down quickly so it doesn't blanket the spinnaker. Marks on the halyard and the topping lift will benefit the crew and allow them to get the lines exactly to the right spot each time setting the spinnaker. In extremely light air, sometimes it will pay to delay your set. This will enable the boat to drift and keep its apparent wind as far forward on the Genoa alone, and then when the speed starts to diminish, set your spinnaker and get the jib down immediately. On this size boat, generally you set the spinnaker from very far forward, either on the lifelines or out of the pulpit. On a smaller boat, you will end up setting the spinnaker right out of the center of the boat. There are two reasons why that's important. One is that you don't want the weight of your bowman all the way forward on a light boat. And secondly, it's almost easier setting it out of the side of the boat where it can be fed out by a crew member. These sleek racing boats are Etchells 22s. The E22 is a 31-foot keel boat, a popular one-design racer. We're here at the windward mark at the Etchells 22 Worlds. The spinnakers are popping out one after another on the first downwind leg. Now we're going to talk about the jibe. I'm going to play the mast man in this maneuver. Two things we can do before we get ready to show you how to jibe to make it a lot easier next time. One is to mark where the inboard end of the pole needs to be so that when the topping lift is let off, the pole can swing through the fore triangle properly. We've preset this end of the pole, and now I'm going to mark it on the mast. So I always go back to that same setting. The second thing that can be done to help make sure that the pole swings through the fore triangle properly in a dip pole jibe is to mark the topping lift. We're going to simulate letting the pole down to exactly the right place. Could we square the boat up a little bit, please? Squaring up means heading the boat directly downwind. We're going to trip the pole, let the topping lift down to exactly the right place where we've preset it, so that it exactly passes above the pulpit and inside the forestay. Now Eric's going to take what is going to be the new guy, snap it in, good, and then square it back on the other side. Now that wasn't perfectly crisp, but that was our first try at it. Let's actually get squared up and try it again. But before we do, I want to point out that we've rigged 2 lines to the tack and 2 lines to the clew to make setup for the jibe easier. While one line is working, the spare line, or the lazy line, is available for setting up the next jibe. Let's go for it, guys. Now we're going to try the jibe for real. Luckily, the wind is cooperating and it's about a perfect strength for practicing. The first thing I'll do as the mast man is I'll reach for what we call the lazy guy. The lazy guy will then be transferred forward to Eric, who will walk forward in front of the headstay and actually sit in the bow pulpit and prepare for the pole to swing through the fore triangle. The next thing I'll do as the mast man is to make sure the inboard end of the pole is exactly at the right height and that the topping lift man is prepared to lower the pole to exactly the right spot so that the pole can trip and go through the fore triangle. So now we're ready to execute the jibe. Could we please square the boat and square the spinnaker? In this case, I'll yell trip. Trip. I'll push the pole out to its new position, and the new guy on the starboard side is then trimmed. Again, ideally, we come out of the jibe at roughly the same angle that we were at on the other side. Pretty good jibe, guys. Let's try it once more. I'll take the lazy after guy up to the bowman. Release the pole from the working after guy. The bowman jams in what is now the new working after guy, and the pitman raises the pole as I guide it across to the sail's pad. So let's try it one more time, folks. The helmsman steers the boat in a slow arc downwind. When the boat is headed directly downwind, the after guy is released and the pitman lowers the topping lift as the helmsman steers into the opposite jibe. The mastman guides the pole to the bowman and up to the other side. Again, ideally, we come out of the jibe at roughly the same angle that we were at on the other side. Roger, that was a really nicely executed jibe. As you probably know, the helmsman can help out a whole lot to make the crew's job easier during the jibe. As usual, timing is everything. And one of the things you did nicely during that jibe is you turned the boat at a proper speed that the crew could keep up, and if you saw them getting a little ahead of you, you just sped up the turn. That's one good idea. The second good idea is that when you're sailing along in light air, your jibe angles are usually quite a bit closer. So you'll need to turn the boat quite a bit faster than you'll have to in heavy air. Another thing I like to do is I look up at the Windex, and if the Windex is pointed abeam, I want to come out on the next jibe with the Windex pointed abeam. And that way you'll ensure that you're exactly at the same angle. Let's actually get squared up and try it again.
Ready? Ready.
Pretty good jibe, guys. Eric is more accustomed to sailing on smaller boats where we end for end the pole. But in top competition like the America's Cup, the bowman actually does not stop the spinnaker pole at the bow pulpit. It comes flying from the old guy, constant speed, all the way through the forward triangle. The bowman goes click, made, and the pole goes straight up to the new side without skipping a beat. When downwind racing, you also get involved with something else, and that's tactics. I've asked two hot Etchells 22 skippers to engage in a mini match race to illustrate them for us. Sailing US 668 in the blue dry suit is skipper Ben Altman. He's with his Chicago crew. Dirk Newellman of Oakville sails KC-50 with his Canadian crew. The Etchells 22 is a fractionally rigged boat, so the spinnaker's height is only 3/4 that of the mast. This sail size makes for easy handling by a small crew. The jib is kept up because it's relatively small and therefore doesn't interfere with the spinnaker. Also, because it's small, it acts much like a staysail does on a bigger boat. At the moment, Dirk is behind Ben. As the wind is from behind, Dirk's object is to maneuver into a position where he can steal Ben's wind. But Ben will have none of that. He's going to jibe. And of course, Dirk jibes too. It's going to be a jibing duel to the finish line. Both boats are evenly matched. Dirk's hope is that Ben and his crew will make a mistake on one of the jibes. They're certainly getting their exercise. Notice Dirk is doing an end-for-end jibe. He has unclipped the pole from the mast and from the sail's tack, and then he'll attach the pole to the new tack, and the other end of the pole will attach to the mast. It's called an end-for-end jibe because the end of the pole that has been attached to the sail is now going to be attached to the mast, and the other end is attached to the sail. As soon as he's finished, he returns to the cockpit to balance the boat. Well, Dirk and his crew put up a tough fight, but Ben's team makes no mistakes and they cross the finish line first. Now watch as they douse the sail. The after guy is released first, and the sail is pulled in beneath the main, and once it's under control, the halyard is released. Good show, guys. The spinnaker that we have up is a 3/4 ounce AP. AP means all-purpose and is by far the most popular spinnaker favored by racers and cruisers alike. It is designed to be most effective when the wind is abeam at 90 degrees and after the beam to about 150 degrees wind angle. What enables this design to be most effective over these wind angles is its balanced profile from head to foot. The head of the sail is not overly full, as is often the case with a runner, nor is it overly flat, as in a reacher. The chord depth is such that it evenly distributes the amount of curve in the head with the curve below the head. We choose nylon for spinnakers as it is extremely strong and resists tearing as well as any material we know of. Nylon, of course, stretches more than that of most other sail fabrics, but this is actually desirable in some spinnakers, other than those designed for very close reaching, where we use lower stretch materials such as mylar and even light Kevlar. 3/4 ounce fabric is pretty versatile for most size boats, as it is light enough to fly in most light winds, but strong enough to hold up in most any wind up to 25 knots. For extreme conditions, we use 1/2 ounce fabric for the light side and 1.5 or 2.2 ounce in very heavy winds. The panel configuration used here is called true radial. It is simply this layout to utilize the long and strongest threads in the fabric to address the load or stress map of the sail. Spinnakers evolved as sailmakers discovered ways to minimize unwanted stretch in the fabric and maximize the projected area of the sail while keeping the sail under control. Early spinnakers, like this vertical cut, tended to distort as wind pressure increased, making it somewhat unstable. Ted Hood, with the crosscut, maximized projected area in the 1950s. The next step in the 60s was the radial head, where the seams radiated out along the stress lines in the head, and later the modern tri-radial, where the seams radiated from the clews as well as the head, giving a stable, stronger shape. The star cut is still popular as a reaching spinnaker because of its relatively flat shape. These sails are often made from heavier fabrics for use in stronger winds. A recent innovation in downwind sails is the Spinnaker. It's designed for cruisers who don't have the crew that racers usually have. The sock, or snuffer, makes it a breeze to launch. Like the Spinnaker, the Spinnaker is specially designed for the boat and the sailing conditions you expect. The hookup is pretty simple and only needs a sheet and halyard. They're led to the bow, which is where a Spinnaker is launched. Eric will begin by taking the tack forward to the headstay with a specially made strap that goes around the headstay and allows the tack to travel up and down along the headstay with the white line that feeds back to the cockpit to adjust it. The next step is to affix the halyard to the top of the Spinnaker. The sail itself sits inside a sock, or what is called a snuffer. The snuffer line, which you'll see in Eric's left hand, one must be particularly careful of to make sure that it's not wrapped around the Spinnaker. The last line that you see coming out of the Spinnaker bag is the Spinnaker sheet. It sheets very much like a Spinnaker sheet to the after portion of the boat and then into the cockpit to a winch. The snuffer containing the Spinnaker is hauled up to the top of the mast. You'll notice that the snuffer line goes up alongside the sock itself. Eric is now ready to pull on the line that's attached to the sock. A Spinnaker is a cross between a Genoa and a Spinnaker. Like a Spinnaker, it's made of light nylon and has a full shape built into it. This Spinnaker is 170% of the 4-triangle size. By comparison, a number 1 Genoa would be about 150%, a Spinnaker about 180%. The Spinnaker's voluminous shape is like that of a Spinnaker. Notice the sleeve attachment on the forestay. The sheet trimmer's position is well forward where he can see the whole sail, particularly the leading edge or luff of the sail. The Spinnaker is asymmetrical with a distinct tack and clew. To jibe, the Spinnaker would have to be doused and reset on the opposite side. When racing, the Spinnaker is rated as a foresail and therefore carries a heavy penalty. For these reasons, Spinnakers are not often used in club racing. Isn't it great how easy it is to take down the Spinnaker? Dousing the Spinnaker isn't as easy. It's a bit of a reach for Eric to release the pole. First, the tack is released.
Trip!
And as the sail is hauled in from the clew, the halyard is released and the sail is stored below. When we're out racing, and after taking the Spinnaker down, we actually bring the Spinnaker down below for repacking. As you can see, our cabin looks quite small and our Spinnaker quite huge. I'm not sure you're going to learn anything by watching us pack the Spinnaker down here, so let me see if I can do a little better. This is a lot better. Let's watch Eric pack the Spinnaker. First, he starts with the foot of the sail. He gathers it up, puts it in the bag, but he leaves the 2 clews outside. Then he starts gathering in 1 leech. The idea is to pack the three sides of the sail so that they can keep the same orientation inside the bag as on the outside. Then he gathers the third side. What he's trying to avoid is causing a twist. That's when one side of the sail gets twisted around another side. This can cause a lot of difficulties when launching the spinnaker. Once the three edges of the sail are in the bag, the body of the sail can be stuffed in pretty willy-nilly. But make sure you don't stuff the corners in too. I challenge you to beat Eric at this. He has quite a fight with the air caught in the sail. After all, spinnakers are designed to hold the wind. Notice that the three corners are still outside the bag. Eric can now check to make sure they are properly oriented. You'll see that the three corners of the spinnaker are actually marked, clew in the two clew areas and head in the head area. This is for the obvious reason that you don't want to set your spinnaker sideways, like we see so often in some of the fun shots of spinnaker set mistakes. We actually have another tip-off as to which is the clew area and which is the head area. You'll notice that the white foot tape comes together with one of the colored leech tapes, whereas at the head, the two leech tapes are colored and they come together. This sail bag has a tie affixed to it. You loop it through the three corners of the sail, so when it comes time to launch the sail, it'll be easy to find the corners for the hookup. We had a great day on the water, and on the way home I had a chance to answer some of our crew's questions.
You say that as you raise the pole, the leeches of the sail get looser, but the sail gets flatter. And as you lower the pole, the leeches get tighter and the sail gets fuller. I'm not too sure what you mean by that. I don't really understand.
Eric, the best analogy I can think of to answer your question is to think of a mainsail when you trim a mainsail. If you let the sheet off, you get what they call twist. And if you look up the leech of the mainsail when you're letting it off, the more you let it off, the more it falls away. And the more you let it fall away, in reality, the flatter the sail gets, or the more twist it has. And so the idea is that if you can pull the leeches of the spinnaker further apart to the point where the sail was perfectly flat or perfectly horizontal, then it would be a perfectly flat, shapeless piece of fabric. If you could figure out a way to shape the sail in such a way that the leeches were very close together, then you'd have this long, voluminous, big balloon-shaped spinnaker, and then it would be extremely full. So I think really if you think of it as just taking your hands on the two leeches and pulling it apart as far as you can, that would be perfectly flat. And if you let it go all the way forward so that your hands were almost touching, you'd have this huge U-shaped arc. And very much like the mainsail, as you let up on the sheet, it twists away or dumps off. It's just like you do in heavy air to depower the boat. You let it off or you twist the main. Similar concept.
How do you decide when you're racing when to fly the spinnaker and when to leave it down?
Well, I suppose you're thinking about the time when you can't decide whether it'd be better to have your jib or genoa up or when it's better to have the spinnaker up. And there's no one rule of thumb there, except that usually a spinnaker in moderate to light breeze is faster at about 55 to 60 degrees apparent wind angle and aft. Now that depends a little bit on the overall depth of the sail. Naturally, a running spinnaker doesn't work all that well at 55 degrees apparent off the bow. You may have to wait till the wind is aft of, say, 65 or 70, where a very flat-reaching, star-cut style sail might start working very well at, say, 48 or 50 apparent. So I think probably a good rule of thumb in an all-purpose sail is don't set it before 60 apparent. Naturally, that that wind angle would start to come aft the windier it is, because a boat wouldn't like to have a spinnaker up maybe at 70 apparent if it was blowing 20 knots, because the boat would be burdened. So there's a little bit of trial and error there, and many times when you're going to a mark in a long race, you'll find that there's no right sail to go straight at the mark. So you set a spinnaker for a while and go a little low, and then you set a jib for a while and go a little high, and eventually you get to the mark that way.
Is there an upper limit on the speed?
A boat has a theoretical hull speed, so there is a point where the boat just simply can't go any faster. On the other hand, if there are some waves and you are surfing at all, a spinnaker will help promote that surfing more easily. So a spinnaker makes more sense in that case than a jib does.
Thank you.
Tom, you stated earlier that the communication between helmsmen and the trimmers are important in heavy wind. How does that apply to light wind situations?
Well, that's a real good question, because ironically it's even more important in light air. The spinnaker trimmer can actually feel the pressure on the spinnaker, and therefore the angle that the boat should be sailing, oftentimes better than the helmsman can. And that's no reflection on the helmsman's ability. It's really the feel that you get in the sheet, or the feel that you get in the guy when you're actually playing the spinnaker. You can get a very quick sense of when the spinnaker has a lot of pressure in it. So this communication between the trimmer and the helmsman should go something like this. The helmsman would say, well, how does the spinnaker feel? And the trimmer would say, well, gee, it feels a little soft right now. Why don't you come up 5 degrees? And then the helmsman says, okay, how does that feel? And the trimmer will say, right on. Or the trimmer will say, I've got a pretty good puff right now. Why don't you try coming down 5 or 10 degrees? And if you go down a race course going like that, you'll have a much better result than you will if the helmsman just tries to dictate it from his station. So I think probably in the overall effect, or the result at the end of the day, it's probably more important in light air that the communication between the trimmer and the helmsman works well than it is even in heavy air.
Tom, could you maybe give me a few pointers on downwind sailing in heavy air?
There are actually a lot of things you can do to make heavy air downwind sailing with the spinnaker up more pleasurable and a lot safer. One thing for sure is that the more modern boats have become easier to sail downwind. If you followed the racing boats of 10 years ago or 15 years ago, they were very fine in the ends, they were very beamy in the middle, they had very high aspect small mainsail. In other words, the boom didn't stick out very far, and they had quite large fore triangles. So what would end up happening is dead downwind, you'd have the spinnaker out to one side of the boat with a huge amount of area and a very small main to counterbalance it on the other side. And what would happen is it would force the boat over to its windward side, and the boat would always want to spin out the wrong way or go out to leeward. The modern boats have more high aspect fore triangles, making the spinnakers somewhat higher aspect and a little smaller as a percentage of the total sail plan. And the mains are quite a bit lower aspect, or longer on the boom, so that the balance between the mainsail and the spinnaker has gotten better. Assuming that you've got a boat that's hard to handle, some of the tricks you can do is, one of the most important things is whatever spinnaker you set is to choke it down. And what I mean by choking it down is to keep the pole fairly low and to move the snatch block for the sheet very far forward in the boat and keep the whole sail choked down fairly low. And that does, if you remember in our analysis of what pole down does, it makes the leeches closer together, the projected area actually a little less, and the depth of the sail greater. So the stability of the sail as far as ease of flying is quite a bit better. And you have less chance of having the sail break or luff or whatever. That's one thing you can do. Another thing you can do is that you try to balance the helm in the boat as best you can. If you feel you have leeward helm, then there are ways to counteract that. You can move all your crew to the leeward side of the boat. You can move the pole forward a little bit and sheet the sail harder. You can bang the main harder to put more pressure on the leeward side of the boat. Those are all things that will help. The other thing is that many boats have heavy air spinnakers. And if you have a heavy air spinnaker, if it's a reacher, for instance, it's usually cut quite a bit smaller. And that's usually a good bet when the wind gets windy. The other thing is, put your best helmsman on the helm and make sure that he's sailing the lowest going down the waves and heats it up or goes a little bit higher as he goes up the wave, because the most amount of pressure is on the whole sail plan when you're going up a wave, and the least amount of pressure is when you're going down the wave. So those are just a few ideas that might help you get downwind and enjoy it a little bit more.
If it's really windy conditions and you're worried about broaching and you've got the spinnaker right on edge and you're driving down in the puffs and you've got somebody playing the vang and the main's flapping all the time, is there any magic tricks you can do at this point to just carry the spinnaker a little further?
You just named most of the important things to be mindful of. Certainly the guy on the vang and the main sheet's the most important. One guy, though, that's also overlooked that's very important is the spinnaker trim man. He can really help you stay on your feet by keeping that spinnaker eased out just barely on edge without losing it all the time. And that takes very careful coordination between the spinnaker trimmer and his grinder, or the guy that's trimming his winch. And I would say that if he's out on edge all the time, that's your best chance to stay on your feet and not broach. And usually the best way to control the broach is if you start to broach and the guy lets that sheet out quite a bit. It allows you to get your bow down quite a bit quicker, get back on your feet, get going in the right direction before he trims the sail back in. That generally is the most important thing. The helmsman can help a little bit too by communicating well with the trimmers. He should tell the spinnaker guy when he's in trouble, he should tell the main guy when he's in trouble, and not just leave it for them to fill it on their own. And I think this communication between each of the trimmers and the helmsman can make the boat, not go into a broach quite as early. The only last thing that the helmsman can do to help is to sometimes give the wheel a couple little jerks to try to promote flow on the rudder, because a lot of times when you're beginning a broach, it's because the boat is heeling too much, and the rudder has a very poor angle in the water, and sometimes will actually stall out. And when the rudder stalls out, the helmsman loses the control over the boat, and it begins to broach just because the rudder can't do anything. So sometimes if you give either the wheel or the tiller a couple of quick jerks to leeward, you can sometimes promote flow back again on the rudder and get the bow down and stay on your feet.
Tom, I race against this boat where they carry their spinnaker pole fairly high. Their spinnaker leeches are really loose. The spinnaker looks awful, but they're extremely fast. What's your views on that?
Well, there's probably no one explanation to that, and there are probably many things that affect the overall performance of a boat that don't have to do with just the sails. The other part of that is that I've been a sailmaker for long enough to know that every time I think I've hit on something that's right, I learn something new, and maybe we don't know everything now, and maybe things that don't look right sometimes are just fine. But there's probably a very simple answer to it. Usually a spinnaker that's too full and too round in the leeches requires a very high pole. And sometimes a sail that's too flat, if you were to raise the pole, would just wash out in the leeches. So perhaps his sail is very full, and when he carries a high pole, it actually opens the leeches to the point where it may not even look that well, but it probably flies a little better than it would if the pole were low.
Tom, what kind of help can I expect from a sailmaker in buying a new set of sails, especially a spinnaker?
That's a good question, Roger. I think one trend that has come about in the sailmaking industry in the last, say, 5 or 6 or 7 years is for the sailmaker to try to take a little better attitude towards what the customer needs to learn and wants to know and how he can help more. Because we feel that one of the important things that maybe hasn't happened over a period of time is the educational part of trying to educate our customer on what kind of sails would be best for him, how to maximize his investment, how not to spend too much money or end up with needless sails or sails that he'll never use. Some of the questions you might ask or some of the things that they might be able to help you with is one good thing about sailmakers is that they sail with their own sails quite a bit. So they, better than anybody, have a good feeling for what kind of sails work and perform best at any given time. And that would include wind ranges, and that would include areas that you'd be sailing in. That would include shapes that would work in particularly rough seas or shapes that would work in particularly smooth seas. So I guess some of the questions that I would ask is, do you know my area? You certainly would have to let the sailmaker know what you intend to do with the sail. I think it's very important that the sailmaker has an intimate knowledge of the other sails that you have on your boat, whether they're his brand or somebody else's brand. You might ask him if included in the price, would he come take a sail with you and check the sail out personally. I think it's very important that you let him know exactly any nuances of the particular boat that you have, or if you have an unusual rig, or if you have any feeling for something that would be good yourself, because oftentimes people that are sailing a particular type of boat may know more about that one boat than the sailmaker. So I see it as a very interactive relationship where the customer must give and the sailmaker must give. And of course, the other important thing is that to have the sailmaker justify his price. If it's more expensive, ask him why it's more expensive. And, you know, if there isn't a good reason, then maybe that's not the right place to go. And if there is a good reason, that's for you to judge yourself. But, and I think the other thing to watch out for is to look around what the other people around you are using and whether they're happy. And, you know, there's no better way to find out about the performance of something than to ask somebody that's using it already. So I think the sailmaker can help in many ways, but I think that this whole relationship between the customer and the sailmaker has to be very interactive and a lot of communication. Well, I've done my best to give you the basics. Now it's up to you to practice.
Spinnakers add power and excitement on those downwind legs, and it takes time to master them. So don't be discouraged if you have difficulties at first. Just keep at it. And in no time at all of your competition will be behind you. This program is part of an excellent series called The Basics, and they include learning to sail, navigation, spinnaker sailing, bareboat chartering, and together they add up to a first-class learning experience to help you become a complete sailor. Learning to sail covers the basics of sailing and safety. Once you've mastered the skills on this video, you'll be able to sail a dinghy or keelboat with confidence. And every sailor thinks about sailing beyond his own territory. Well, in navigation, we sail some of the most beautiful cruising grounds in the world, and we teach you the skills to explore those new horizons yourself. And we all think of that idyllic vacation, sailing some turquoise waters in some far-off paradise. Well, in bareboat chartering, we teach you how to do it. My co-host is world sailor and charterer Patience Wales. And believe me, Patience has sailed everywhere. In spinnaker sailing, you'll learn how to master that tremendous sail that gives you the power that you really want. And you'll also learn how to use a cruising spinnaker. Your host is Tom Whidden, America's Cup sailor, and Dennis Connors tactician. I know that these 4 videos are going to be a much-used reference in your library. And they're a great getaway, too. I mean, you just put your feet up and watch and indulge your sailing dreams. We've also produced 4 books to accompany the video series. They're Basic Sailing and Cruising Skills, Intermediate Sailing and Cruising Skills, Coastal Navigation Skills, the 3 that I wrote, and Celestial Navigation Skills by John Perriton. The books provide a structured learning experience and are full of illustrations, theory, and exercises to let you practice your skills. The videos are $39.95 plus shipping and handling, and the books are $16.95 plus shipping and handling. For ordering information, call toll-free in Ontario, 1-800-387-8411, or in Toronto, 484-2614. In British Columbia, call the Knowledge Network, 604-660-2190. And in all other territories, call Soma Film and Video, 416-466-0822.